A great game needs a great villain. The Witcher 3 has several of them. The Crones of Crookback Bog hint towards the hidden horrors of the continent and embody the open hostility of war-torn Velen. Radovid demonstrates the madness and cruelty that was so often characteristic of medieval rulers and makes it perfectly clear that no matter who wins the Third Northern War, the future for the Northern Realms is bleak indeed. Caleb Menga echoes the fanatical violence inflicted by institutions like the Inquisition and reminds us that such organizations will always target the other in order to consolidate power. But none of these incredibly well-written characters rise to the status of the game's true villain. Even Eredin, the game's primary antagonist, does not, in my opinion, earn this title. Though he opposes us throughout the game, attacking Ciri everywhere she goes, and serves as the final boss, many of the most important events of The Witcher 3 take place after he dies on the Naglfar, and how you slay the King of the Wild Hunt, with your sword, with signs, with a crossbow, or a bomb, plays no part in which of the three endings you get. The only thing Eredin really does in the final act is get in Geralt's way, and delay the player from reaching the conclusion. Thus, the game's true villain is not the bandit who tries to rob us along the path, but the bastard who has the potential to spoil the victory celebration waiting for us back home. And the person who can do that is not the Crones, not Radovid, nor Menga, or even Eredin, but Emhyr var Emreis. Though he only appears 4 or 5 times depending on the path you take through this 100-hour experience, Emhyr's presence looms over the game, not only as our initial quest giver, but the game's true villain, in that it is he, and he alone, who can prevent the player from achieving the best ending. In doing so, his selfish motivations for finding Ciri are laid bare, contrasting with Geralt's own fatherly intentions, and further reveal the true role of the White Wolf in the adult life of his adopted daughter. But before I go on, if you are a Witcher fan, then please be sure to like, subscribe, and consider supporting me with a YouTube channel membership or over on Patreon. My dream is to make these videos full-time someday, and by doing any of those things, you'll be helping make that dream a reality. We meet Emhyr for the first time at the end of Lilac and Gooseberries, a quest that, as I've said elsewhere, demonstrates Geralt's identity as a true family man, someone who, at the end of the day, just wants to go home to their dilapidated castle up north and live the simple life with the sorceress of your choice. But at this point in the game, that goal is really confined exclusively to that love interest, because as far as Geralt is aware, Ciri is gone. The meeting with Emhyr in Vizima changes all of this. Now, Geralt knows that the potential exists for him to not only live a life of luxury with either Yennefer or Triss, but to bring home the little girl he raised at Kaer Morhen all those years ago. Suddenly, his dream of a happily ever after with his beloved raven-haired or red-headed witch evolves into a realistic chance to reunite all the scattered members of his found family. Though Emhyr provides Geralt with knowledge of Ciri's return, he's still a roadblock to this fantasy. This, of course, is apparent to anyone familiar with the books, but I think it's important to note how good a job CD Projekt Red does of conveying Emhyr's villainous nature to those unfamiliar with the universe. First off, he's portrayed by the illustrious Charles Dance, whose voice will always be associated with Tywin Lannister from Game of Thrones, one of the best heels in the fantasy genre, and perhaps all of modern television. Even if you've never cracked the spine of Blood of Elves, there's a damn good chance you know that Tywin orchestrated the Red Wedding, and thus, just hearing Emhyr's voice is enough to make the player go, "Oh shit! Not this fucking guy!" It's a major credit to the casting department that they were able to score such a big-name actor with such a villainous reputation for this role, because it conveys what book readers already know, that Emhyr is a total douche canoe. His status as the game's true antagonist won't be revealed for some time. For now, however, his voice alone is enough to let the player know that we're going to hate this guy. But even if the player doesn't know anything about the dastardly Lord of Casterly Rock, the tension between Geralt and Emhyr should make it clear that these two have a history, enough beef to fill an Arby's. Geralt is by no means a barrel full of laughs. He's usually brief and to the point with anyone who's not a part of his found family. But this interaction is cold, even for him. He can even refuse to bow before him, which is about as much of a middle finger as you can afford to give an emperor if you'd like to keep your head. And who can blame him? The last time he saw Emhyr, he was after Ciri because he wanted more in common with the Lannisters than just his voice actor.
Ugh, yikes.
And in the time since, he orchestrated the assassination of King Foltest, one of the few rulers Geralt actually liked, decimated the Viper School, and dragged the Northern Realms into a war that's killed thousands. So Geralt's got good reason to flip him the bird, should you choose to do so. In any case, the scene, though brief, tells us a lot about Emhyr. He's come to Geralt for help because he has no other option, because he knows there's no one out there who Ciri trusts as much as she does the White Wolf. So even within a few minutes of his meeting with Geralt, he's already manipulating her, already using the people she trusts to get what he wants. And what exactly does he want? Why the renewed interest in his long-lost daughter? Reasons of state, he says. He doesn't mince words, he's right to the point. As I said in my last video, Geralt has moments where he's very expressive, moments where his poker face can't match up to something he's heard. Surely he knew Emhyr's motivations were selfish, but he's still disgusted to hear him admit it so openly. Geralt's used to having his clients lie to him, for the farmer who asked him to exorcise the wraith haunting his cornfield to pretend that he doesn't know how it got there, when in truth he stabbed his brother in the back at that very spot a few weeks earlier. But here, Emhyr makes it clear that he's out for himself right from the start. Geralt then heads off to meet with Yennefer to plan his search for the ashen-haired girl. It'll be a while before we encounter Emhyr again, possibly close to 100 hours, depending on how much of a completionist you are. Though it was never made explicitly clear what Emhyr meant when he said he needed Ciri for, quote, reasons of state, Geralt can find out the truth through conversations with Ambassador Var Attre and General Vorhis. As it turns out, Emhyr's war with the North is wildly unpopular with the Nilfgaardians, so much so that the noble class and trade corporations have begun conspiring against him. To clarify, when I say that the war is unpopular, I don't mean that the Nilfgaardians have suddenly become a bunch of pacifists or tree-hugging dryads. What I mean is that the Nilfgaardians think the war should be over by now, that Emhyr should have smashed through the Northern Realms and conquered the entire continent ages ago. He's the mighty Emperor of Nilfgaard. What's a few castles and countries compared to his powerful white flame and the awe-inspiring armies that march beneath the banner of the Black Sun? His inability to achieve a quick dub has resulted in the nobles and trade corporations viewing him as an ineffective ruler and his campaigns failures. It's not the conflict itself that the Nilfgaardians are against, just that they haven't steamrolled their enemies and brought the boys back home in time for Christmas. So when I say it's unpopular, I mean it's unpopular politically, not morally. Don't get it twisted. The Nilfgaardians are still a highly aggressive, expansionist nation. Because of this, Emhyr needs a quick victory, but more than that, he needs a successor. Someone to pass the throne to and take the heat off himself. The developers don't come out and say this, at least not initially, so the player's left to read between the lines and figure it out on their own. But it is ultimately made clear through the game's middling ending, where Ciri becomes Empress of Nilfgaard. Emhyr's selfishness here helps differentiate him from Geralt. While her adopted father simply wants to bring Ciri home to reunite her with her found family, her biological father wants to use her as a political chess piece to save his own skin. There could be no greater demonstration of the many things that separate these two men than this profound disparity. It cements him early on as Geralt's opposite, which will allow us to better understand his role as the true villain of The Witcher 3 later on. I also really like how this plotline about the rebellious Nilfgaardian populace is handled, particularly because it's such a natural end result of both the books and the previous game. Whether it's in Sapkowski's text or CD Projekt Red's Pixels, Nilfgaard spends practically every minute of their screen time at war. It sets them up as both a great antagonist and a force to be reckoned with. But the reality is that, as Sun Tzu once said, no nation benefits from prolonged warfare. It's true in modern day, it was true even in medieval times, and it's certainly true here on the continent. It's another great example of fantastic writing by the developers of injecting the realistic consequences of perpetual warfare into their game. So often, we see the imperialist war machine in fantasy settings just keep on turning, but here we're reminded that this was never truly the reality. Even at the height of nationalism and empire building, people tired of war eventually, and after 3 northern wars, the Nilfgaardians have had enough. For all the reasons I just mentioned, they want Emhyr to wrap this thing up or get off the throne. Geralt won't see Emhyr again until he's forced to do so, intercepted by Nilfgaardian soldiers while en route to Kaer Morhen. Emhyr is pissed and wants an update on the search for his missing chess piece. I mean, his beloved daughter. Functionally, this scene serves 2 purposes. First, it refocuses the game's plot. At this point in The Witcher 3, Geralt has explored 3 different regions of the continent, met 3 different casts of characters, and investigated 3 different leads on Ciri's whereabouts. In essence, the player has essentially experienced what amounts to 3 smaller games by this point. There really is that much content in Skellige, Novigrad, and especially Velen. Thus, it's only natural to forget what you were doing at the start of all this, and who sent you on this mission in the first place. It's a bit like a DM corralling his party after a wild and winding adventure and ushering them towards the 3rd act before they spend another 3 sessions playing Gwent. But it also reminds us of who Emhyr is, why we aren't supposed to like this guy, why he's after Ciri, and ultimately why he's Geralt's opposite. The framing of this scene is spectacular. Even with the meeting with Yennefer and Geralt on tap, Dimestore Napoleon over here has to keep planning his boneheaded imperialist conquests. Throughout the meeting, Emhyr is terse, focused only on results. He wants to know what's taking the White Wolf and the raven-haired sorceress so long, why they haven't waltzed in through the door with his walking abdication plan yet. Notably, he comes right out and admits that the nobles and trade corporations are breathing down his neck, exposing the political powder keg the player might have already uncovered by this point. And in fact, he's so results-oriented that he has no real reaction when Geralt brings up the troubling prospect that Ciri might be Uma. He simply asks if the curse can be lifted, and shows no concern over the fact that his daughter might have been transformed into such a thing. Everything that's happened to Ciri during her journey, the scars, both mental and physical, the horrors she's witnessed, the fear she must have felt knowing that the Wild Hunt was after her at every turn, none of that, even a complicated curse that she might be suffering from, matters to Emhyr. Only whether or not she's around to keep his deposed ass out of the fire. Geralt's next 2 meetings with Emhyr are optional, but they are significant nonetheless. Once Ciri's location at the Isle of Mists has been discovered, the White Wolf has the opportunity to travel around the continent and gather a suicide squad of allies to help him fight the Wild Hunt. And Emhyr is one of the many people Geralt can go to for help. After suggesting Geralt bring her to Vizima, and, surprisingly, agreeing with his reasoning for fighting the Wild Hunt out in the wilderness, Emhyr will agree to send troops to Kaer Morhen, so long as General Vorhis leads them. One might think that this is simply because Vorhis is his most trusted understudy, and while that's true, in the mid-league ending where Ciri becomes Empress, it's implied that she's married to this dude. I don't believe for a second that this isn't a calculated move on his part. What the mid-flame dancing on the graves of his foes is really doing here is trying to lay the groundwork for this union, to get his right-hand man as close to his daughter as he can and into her good graces. That way, his plan for succession will go off without a single speed bump on the path. He probably looks at Boris the same way American presidents do their vice president, a perfect candidate to succeed them for a 3rd term and carry on the policies of their administration. So even though he intends to pass the throne to Ciri, he's still looking for a way to hold on to power in some form, just like he's still looking for ways to win his wildly unpopular war. His plan isn't just to abdicate, but to exit stage left while his daughter and his right-hand man rule his empire. To be clear, I'm not suggesting that Emhyr intends to rule from the shadows. Rather, he likely views them as the perfect power couple to carry on his legacy. He's not only using her to escape the angry nobles breathing down his neck, but to ensure his bloodline keeps the crown. Regardless, Geralt refuses Emhyr's request, but I doubt it's because he sees Emhyr's chess move. It's more because he doesn't want Vorhis in his keep, telling him how to defend it. And thus, not a single soldier from her father's army shows up to help protect Ciri in her time of need. This speaks volumes about Emhyr's character and his intentions for Ciri, that he couldn't bend to Geralt even at such a critical moment. But perhaps none of Emhyr's scenes tell us more about him than the one that follows, yet another optional one. After the Battle of Kaer Morhen, Geralt is faced with a choice. Ciri wants to avenge Vesemir and has learned that Imlerith will be at Bald Mountain on the Sabbath, a perfect opportunity to strike if there ever was one. But Emhyr's been expecting an update and a chance to speak with his long-lost daughter. With Ciri safe for the time being, and Vizima not far from Velen, if they're going to meet, now is the time. As with any moment involving Ciri, Geralt's emotions in this scene are so well done. The disdain with which he calls Emhyr her father, the strength he displays in telling the Emperor that their meeting will be brief, and the resolve he shows in rejecting the coin purse, or the joy at accepting it, depending on how the player decides to handle that particular choice. It comes in stark contrast to his opposite, Emhyr, who once again is all business. He refers to Ciri by her full name, has his court of yes-men bow before her, and throws his cards right down on the table, alluding to his plan to pass the throne of Nilfgaard to her. It's a scene that's as well written as it is disturbing. Emhyr seems to believe that all this fanfare and pomp and circumstance will win her over, like an absentee father who bowed out for cigarettes showing up 10 years later to take their kid to Chuck E. Cheese, convinced that cardboard pizza, creepy animatronics, and a few rounds of Ninja Turtles in the arcade will somehow make up for lost time. Geralt leaves Ciri to speak with Emhyr alone, and waits in the throne room for a few minutes. Vorhis stops by, reveals his knowledge of Emhyr's succession plan, and makes a blatant pass at Ciri. Not long after, she emerges from the garden, furious at her father's proposition, before leaving with the White Wolf for Bald Mountain. Emhyr's final mandatory appearance comes in the third act of the game, aboard his flagship on the Skellige seas. His presence here is a bit of a surprise. Despite already being embroiled in a war with the Northern Realms, he's decided to test Skellige's new king by launching an invasion there too. Strategically, it's fucking boneheaded. Sure, the early days of a new monarch would probably be the best time to attack the Isles, but is it wise for Nilfgaard to stretch their forces even thinner than they already are? Definitely not. But again, such realities don't matter to Emhyr. He's consumed by his imperialism, whether it's his countless wars, none of which are going as he hoped, or his plan to pass the crown to Ciri. In all likelihood, this move is intended to be the grand epilogue to his ongoing campaign, a final military conquest to cap off his rule, and hand his daughter a continent-spanning empire that will forever bear his legacy, even if he's no longer on the throne. But no matter his intentions, it's here where Emhyr finally gives in to Geralt. Sure, he chastises him, can even threaten to cut off his head, but there's barely any fire behind his words. Whether or not you brought Ciri to him in Vizima, he's tired, worn down, and hands over Fringilla Vigo to the White Wolf right after reading Yennefer's letter. His real focus is on his campaign. He seems to have essentially decided to let the situation with his daughter play out, confident that she'll take him up on his offer. If you get the game's good ending, denoted by the quest, something ends, something begins, you'll have a final meeting with Emhyr in Vizima, where Geralt tricks the Emperor into believing that Ciri is dead, so she can go off and become a Witcher without having to worry about him chasing after her. Major credit to the developers and voice actor Doug Cockle for this scene. The White Wolf puts on a world-class acting performance, such that it not only fooled Emhyr, but me on my first playthrough of the game. I can't even begin to tell you how pissed I was playing this game at 3 a.m. in my parents' den at 25 years old, a stack of empty Yingling cans in front of me and a blizzard raging outside, convinced that I'd fucked up and gotten Ciri killed. Seriously, for a dude who is supposedly emotionless, he delivers an Oscar-worthy acting job here, and he needs to if he's going to effectively cover Ciri's tracks. But more importantly, it's a narrative beat that makes the reveal that she did indeed survive, and the entire ending itself all the sweeter. But we'll talk about that more in a future video on Ciri. For now, let's keep the focus on Emhyr. Though he's been straight to the point and taciturn the entire game, the Emperor's lack of concern for his daughter here is striking. Met with news of her death, his questions aren't expressions of grief. They're attempts to figure out whether or not Geralt is telling the truth. He's not asking about the status of her body so he can plan a royal funeral. He wants to make sure that the White Wolf isn't bullshitting him. Only when he's bought Geralt's act does he show any real emotion, asking if Ciri had any last words for him. After over 100 hours of gameplay and sending Geralt to 3 different nations in search of his daughter, it takes the news of her death to finally get him to display anything approaching real affection for her. Still, Emhyr's moment of something akin to fatherhood is there 1 minute and gone the next. As the White Wolf leaves his office, there's no doubt that Emhyr feels defeated. But after everything we've seen from him throughout the game, I think it's safe to say that it's not the loss of his daughter he's struggling with here, but the collapse of his plan to pass the crown to her. All of this establishes Emhyr as Geralt's opposite, a distant father who seeks to use Ciri to get himself out of a mess he himself created, rather than a found father who simply wishes to see her live the life she wants to live, free of those who would manipulate her and take advantage of her elder blood and her royal lineage to achieve their selfish desires. And in turn, it sets Emhyr up as the true villain of The Witcher 3. Unless you're out to beat the game on Death March, there's no real possibility of getting hard stuck in The Witcher 3. It's not Dark Souls. If you're having a tough time and want to get on with the incredible narrative, you can just lower the difficulty, at which point the monster who's been kicking your ass should feel like a mere drowner. Thus, Imlerith, the Crones, or even Eredin himself are little more than brief roadblocks on the path to the conclusion. Rather, the true challenge is whether or not the player can help Geralt grow into a father who's ready to let go, to allow his adopted daughter to become the person she's supposed to be, to support her rather than parent her. All of the decisions Geralt is faced with in the third act of the game deal with this theme. Though whether or not Ciri becomes Empress boils down to who wins the Third Northern War, and if you decided to visit Emhyr before tracking down Imlerith, her survival depends on Geralt choosing to support her rather than parent her in 5 critical decisions. In each of these decisions, the good option, the one that will help ensure Ciri defeats the White Frost, is either an example of building Ciri up, like the snowball fight, and joining in on the destruction of Avalok's lab, or trusting her to make adult decisions on her own, like talking with Philippa and taking a detour to visit Skjald's grave. You can bet that if Emhyr were in Geralt's place, he would have chosen to stifle her, to coerce her into doing what he wants, just as he does throughout the entire game. He would have inserted himself into her meeting with Philippa, rebuked her for breaking Avalok's things, and encouraged her to forget about Skjald. And he certainly wouldn't have given her a precious memory in the snows of Kaer Morhen. It's important to reiterate here that while I think both endings where Ciri survives are appropriate conclusions and do reflect that Geralt has grown and changed into the father figure she needed him to be, in order to get the best ending, the one where Ciri becomes a Witcher, the player must decide against visiting Emhyr in Vizima. Otherwise, they'll be locked into the bittersweet Empress ending. In doing so, CD Projekt Red is showing us that the path to greatest victory lies in pouring cold water on the wishes of the White Flame, and putting as much thematic distance between him and Geralt as possible. Emhyr might not ever pick up a sword, challenge Geralt to a duel, or show up with an imposing health bar and dramatic music for a 3-phase boss fight. But if Geralt's path to victory, to ensuring Ciri defeats the White Frost and lives to tell the tale, is through making decisions a good father would make in the support of his adult daughter, the decisions that the man who helped bring her into this world never would because he's too caught up in using her to further his own goals, then that makes Emhyr our real antagonist. And that makes him, as much as I hate the guy, so important to The Witcher 3. As much as Geralt and the player might despise interacting with him, he's incredibly well written, and at the end of the day, he is the game's true villain. But he's far from the only adversary worth talking about, so I hope you'll join me next time as we take a deep dive into the crones of Crookback Bog. Thanks for watching. Big thanks to Ellen Storm for allowing me to use her covers from the Witcher 3 soundtrack for these videos. Big shout out to James Pruitt, Raven Lampkin, Corey Matson, Gustavo Balabi, Reed, and Pythonian, who get early access to these videos thanks to donations of $5 to $10 a month. See you guys next time.